So welcome everyone to this policy exchange on PFAS-free solutions, the challenge ahead, organized by Orgalim, Europe's technology industries. We have quite a few registered participants today, over 700, so we will start slowly to allow everybody to log in to the webinar. Well, welcome everyone. Really nice to see you. My name is Daniel Wennick, and I'm policy director at Orgalim, and I will be the moderator for the policy exchange today. So before we start, here are some sort of house rules. So the event is recorded, and all attendees are muted. The recording of the event, presentations, Orgalim views, and recommendations will be shared early next week via email. Due to the very high number of participants, the chat functionality is not available, so we have disabled it. However, the questions submitted by participants before the event are integrated in the moderated panel discussion, and we will try to ask as many as possible of those questions. You will also find in the handout sections a copy of the agenda and the speaker's bio. So, and we also ask you to please promote this event on our social media channels. So you find there on Twitter or X, you have the hashtag there at Orgalim, the handle at Orgalim_EU. And you also find us on LinkedIn through Orgalim. So let's go to the next slide, and I will now do the introduction. So first of all, about Orgalim, so Europe's technology industries, who do we represent? So Orgalim is an industry and trade organization. We represent Europe's largest industrial branch, and that's divided into sort of technology industries is divided into three different subsectors. So that's mechanical engineering, metal technology, and electrical engineering, electronics and ICT. And overall, the companies in these three sector branches have a turnover of 2,819 billion euros, and there are 11.9 million people employed in Europe's technology sectors, and the annual exports are of 740 billion euros. And there's 770,000 companies in these sectors, most of them being SMEs, with a 99% share of SMEs of those 770,000 companies. Next slide, please. And then for the membership of Orgalim, so who are members? We have three different type of members. So national industry associations are members. We also have European sector associations as members, and then we also have a direct membership for corporates or for companies. If you have questions about membership, and if you're thinking about joining Orgalim, please get in touch with communications@orgalim.eu, and they will be able to provide more information. On the next slide, you will see the membership of Orgalim. So this is our current membership. So we have 48 member associations, 28 national ones, and then 20 sector associations. You can see a couple of them here. So for Austria is the first one, FMTI, Belgium it's Agoria, and so on. And for the sector organizations, you can see, for example, T&D Europe, so transmission and distribution technology. You can also see PNO Europe, Euroalarm, and other European organizations in there. And then you also see there's a couple of corporate members, for example, Siemens, Schneider Electric, Smiths. And we also have amongst our speakers, you will see from a national organization in France, FIM, and then in Germany, VDMA and ZVI. Can go to next slide, please. So this is the agenda for today. So we're right on time, opening remarks until 5 minutes past half past 2. And the next stage is then the keynote speaker. That's Martin Beckman from DG Grow, who's also responsible for PFAS at the Commission. And then the next agenda point are industry views with Kirsten Metz from ZVI and Arthur van der Berge from FIM. And then next step is a moderated panel discussion. And then there's closing remarks. And also during the moderated panel discussion, we will have questions that were sent in by the audience ahead of today's discussion. So with that, we're very honored to have Martin Beckman with us today. And I pass the floor to you, Martin. Very warm welcome to this webinar. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, thank you and good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to speak on this event. So I'll try to explain a bit on the REACH restrictions on PFAS and on substitution during this presentation, which will take about 20 minutes, I hope. Sometimes a bit difficult to keep in the time because there are so many things ongoing, so we can talk for days, but let's try to keep short. I understood there are many participants on this webinar. So there might be some repetition for some of you, but I think it's important to explain the process to all of you because not everybody is familiar with the REACH process. As indicated, my name is Martin Beekman. I'm working for DG Grow in the REACH unit, and the REACH file, the REACH legislation is shared between DG Grow and DG Environment, and I'm working mostly on PFAS-related restrictions. So we can go to the next slide. So one slide on the PFAS pollution. I will not go into the details. I think we are all aware about the seriousness of the PFAS pollution. There are many articles in newspapers, scientific articles, etc., about PFAS pollution all over Europe, in soil, in water, etc. I think nobody will deny that there is a serious health and environmental concern here, which need to be addressed. The other side is that these PFAS are used in many applications, also in critical applications, which we need if we want to have a transition to a green and digital economy, and also if Europe wants to have a strategic autonomy with less dependence on Chinese, Asian companies. So I think it's also important that we keep the European chemical industries, and also it's not only the chemical industries, it's also the industries using those chemicals and materials. And we need them in Europe. So the challenge is on the one hand, taking action on PFAS pollution, and on the other hand, also keeping our industries in Europe. Next slide. There are many things ongoing on PFAS, and in the rest of the presentation, I will focus on the REACH and the REACH restrictions as announced, but there are also other pieces of legislation in Europe tackling the PFAS pollution. So we have the Industrial Emission Directive, we have the POPs regulation, which is the implementation of the Stockholm Convention, we have the FCAS regulation, Drinking Water Directive, Water Framework Directive, Groundwater Framework Directive, and the Food Contaminants Regulation. Well, I'm not the expert in all those regulations, but I put them here on the slides for you to see that there are actions ongoing in all these areas, and I'm sure you will find the experts working on these regulations and directive if needed. Next slide. So PFAS. PFAS is a very large group of chemicals, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And they contain many individual substances. So over 10,000 of PFAS substances are known. And we're already facing PFAS pollution for quite some years. So already about 20 years actions are being taken to avoid the emissions of PFAS to the environment. So at a global level, action is taking on some substances mentioned here. So it's the PFOA, the perfluorooctanoic acid, C8. It has a carbon chain of 8 carbon atoms. We have also PFAS, so the perfluorohexanoic hexasulfonic acid. Then we have PFOS, which is also a C8 chemical with a sulfonic acid. And we have the long chain PFCA, so perfluorocarboxylic acids. So a lot of chemical names there, but these are the chemicals which are mostly researched and where the most attention was paid already for some years. So these are chemicals banned or in the process of banning at a global level. Next slide. Then specifically in the European Union, we're also working on the restriction of several individual PFASs. We already have in Annex 17 of REACH some restrictions. Also there we have the long chain PFCA. So the moment it will be a global restriction, we most likely repeal this restriction to avoid double regulation. But for the moment, it's still there in REACH. Then we have the TDFAs, it's entry 73 in the Annex 17. It's a specific restriction on consumer mixtures. So this substance was used in spray applications, for example, to protect shoes. We also had a dossier on PFAS, but if you remember, it was on the previous slide as well. So to avoid double regulation, we do not have it in the REACH Annex 17. We have the dossier, but it is going to the POP regulation. Then there are some restrictions upcoming. So PFAS-A, it's again a C6 PFAS. We have had a positive vote on the proposal of the Commission in February of this year. This proposal is undergoing a scrutiny period of 3 months in Parliament and Council, and we hope to adopt this measure during summer of this year. Then currently we are working on a proposal to restrict PFAS in firefighting foams. We hope to present our proposal at the end of this year. And then we have the universal PFAS proposal. And actually this is the proposal which raised all the attention and concerns, and I will further dig into this one. But I thought it was helpful to see and to explain in this slide and the previous slide that we are already acting on many PFAS, individual PFAS substances to try to avoid emissions to the environment as much as possible. No need for you to remember all the chemical names. For some of you, it might be specifically interested, but it's really the aim of these slides were to show how we are trying already to do as much as we can to avoid pollution. But you can also see, well, we have this chemical, then we have next chemical, etc. And with this universal PFAS restriction proposal, it's try to combine all these efforts to have it as one group approach. So we can go to the next slide now. So now I'm focusing on this universal PFAS restriction proposal, and then it's good to explain how this proposal is currently being assessed. So there are 3 steps. First, in this case, 5 national authorities, so Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, and Norway have prepared a dossier. They made this document. It's a large document with many thousands of pages, and they have submitted this dossier to the ECHO's Chemicals Agency, ECHA. So we are currently in phase 2. The dossier is at ECHA. It's not an ECHA dossier. It's still the dossier of the 5 countries, but ECHA is assessing the dossier. And as part of this assessment, there are 2 consultation periods. We had one last year for 6 months, and we received over 5,600 comments from stakeholders. And currently, these comments are being assessed by the dossier submitters and by the 2 scientific committees of ECHA, the Risk Assessment Committee and the Socio-Economic Analysis Committee. So these committees, they are independent. There are experts in these committees, and they will formulate their view on the dossier as it's on the table. And they will carefully assess all the dossier, but also the comments. A second consultation will take place when the draft SEAC opinion is ready. This draft SEAC opinion will then be published, and there is a possibility for 2 months to react on that opinion. As said, it is at ECHA, it's the stage where these independent committees are acting. It's not at the Commission. We are carefully following this process in ECHA because we are very much interested. We are observing the committee meetings, but we do not have a specific role. We will get a specific role when phase 2 is finalized and the opinion of the committees together with the dossier are sent to the Commission. Then it's coming to my desk and to the desk of my colleague in environment, and then it's up to us to present a Commission proposal based on all the information we receive. And this Commission proposal will be discussed with member states, and we are, if agreed by the REACH committee with a qualified majority, then we will have again the scrutiny procedure and adopt the measure. So we are still in, not in the early or the middle stage of the process. And I think that is very important to mention, during these steps, the proposal can change. That's also, of course, important because it changed the proposal, but it also can take into account all the comments received. Otherwise, a consultation wouldn't have much sense if you cannot change the proposal. So during the steps, the proposal can change, and changes can be expected, but of course to be seen. What can I say more of it? So to remember, everything is carefully assessed, all the comments are carefully assessed. Maybe it's good to mention that due to the large size of the dossier, ECHA is taking this assessment in steps. So they divided all the users in different sectors, and they will discuss sector by sector their assessment and their opinion. On the website of ECHA, you can find the planning for the coming plenary meetings. We can go to the next slide. So as mentioned, but it's important to keep in mind, I'm trying to explain the REACH process in meetings like this, but for the moment on the universal PFAS proposal, we are observer. We are observing these scientific committees. It is good to mention several things. So there can be derogations and transitional periods justified based on some facts. So if, and I think that's important, it is just a copy and paste of the legal text actually. So we have to determine the risk for the environment or for human health. This risk can be during use, but it can be also during manufacture or during end of life. But we also have to assess the availability of alternatives and the socio-economic impact. And we have to come up with a balanced restriction based on these elements. We envisage as a Commission that there will be derogations for critical uses if there are no alternatives are available. And I think that automatically follows from the previous bullets, because that is the assessment we have to make. How this will exactly look like, I cannot say today, because we need the assessment of the committees for this. Even if we allow or derogate the use of PFAS in some sectors or in some applications, it will be important to minimize emissions of PFAS during their entire life cycle, because that's in the end the aim to try to prevent this pollution. Once we receive the RAC and SAILC opinion, the Commission will do our utmost best to prepare our proposal as fast as possible on this dossier. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this was so far about the process. I think because the topic of today is also specifically on the substitution part. So we've seen that in the past, working on this PFOS, PFOA restriction, it already initiated substitution, but we mostly saw that companies were changing from the C8 chemistry to the C6 chemistry. And now we are worried about the C6 substances. So therefore, in the chemical strategy for sustainability, we announced a group approach, and the universal PFAS restriction proposal is a very clear example of such a group approach. And also papers from academia and public awareness, etc., is clearly indicating we should move away from the use of all those PFAS. So moving towards substitution of all PFAS. Of course, it's a big challenge. Next slide. If you're now looking what is going on in Europe at the moment, we have seen that for the fire use in firefighting foams, many alternatives are currently available, and we are in the process of phasing them out. That can take time. There are some challenges now and there, but I think for these applications, suitable alternatives are available. Also, we see PFAS-free substitutes or PFAS-free alternatives available for several consumer articles, like the outdoor clothing, like your outdoor jacket, like in cookware, like in food packaging, like the pizza boxes, and also for consumer mixtures like ski masks, cosmetics, waterproofing sprays. For all these applications, you see alternatives already on the market. For other applications, the process is ongoing. We've seen initiatives on the use of fluorinated gases, on solar panels, on batteries and membranes, but there are more examples, and these alternatives are more still in the, well, I would say it in the starting phase, in the initial phase. So we've seen some companies work on it, but it is not that widely available as the other ones at the left side of this slide. But we see good developments over there. Next slide. So what is the challenge in Europe? And that's a challenge for the government, but I think it's also a challenge for the companies that we need to find the right balance. So we need, as a commission, as authority, to restrict uses if alternatives are available to avoid the pollution. But of course, we also need companies sufficient time to allow to transition to these alternatives. And that's also always a bit of a balancing act. It should be not too short, but also not too long, because you also want to stop as quickly as possible. So we have to come up with the right moment. But as mentioned also on the first or the second slide, we also have to ensure our own policy objectives. We would like and we want to deliver green and digital transition. This in combination with a high level of the protection of human health and the environment. And well, at this moment at least, we do not see for all applications alternatives readily available. We will need the assessment from the committees to be more concrete on that, but that's the current situation. One thing is we certainly would like to stimulate substitution, but without too much overregulation. And at this moment, DG GROW is running a project on substitution planning, because this is really something we learned from the experience in the past for authorizations and restrictions on the REACH. It's very difficult to have very strict plannings. We cannot say at the moment, oh, we give you 10 years and then you have to be completely switched to the alternatives. If we don't know exactly if the alternative is ready, you have to invent the wheel, then you have to certification or other things. So it's a process. It's not one fixed date you can put a grip on. So what we're now looking in this substitution planning project is to see how we can improve this bit strict situation where there is only one date or a few dates, but without being too flexible, I would say. There should be a drive for substitution still. So that's really a challenge, and we are working very hard on that. And with that, at the last slide, so I would like to thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for very interesting input into this policy exchange and further food for thought. And with that, we can already move on to the first panel and industry views on PFAS restriction proposal with Kirsten Metz and Arthur van der Berger. And you have your bios there also partly in front of you. And with that, I pass the floor to Kirsten.
So good afternoon all. Thank you very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure for me to summarize Orgalim's views on the EU PFAS restriction file. Many thanks to the Orgalim team for organizing this event, and many thanks also to you, Mr. Bigman, and to your colleagues in DG Grow for having this exchange with us and hopefully taking our messages into account. What we support with respect to the PFAS restriction file. We agree that the use of hazardous substances should be reduced wherever it is reasonable and possible. Our industries are continuously working on reducing the content of hazardous substances in their products to support a circular economy and a healthier environment. They will continue their efforts to reduce the environmental impact of their products and processes. We support that emissions of PFAS should be limited. We acknowledge that emissions of hazardous PFAS can pose a risk for both health and the environment and should therefore be minimized. PFAS applications that cause environmental problems and for which there are suitable alternatives available shall be controlled. We recognize the environmental problems that certain PFAS applications can pose. Those identified as posing a risk should be subject to appropriate risk management measures. Restriction of these applications deems proportionate if there is a technically suitable, economically proportionate, and less environmentally and health damaging alternative. We support targeted tools to minimize identified PFAS risks from industrial sites. To limit negative economic consequences for industry as well as for society, it is important to consider whether identified risks from industrial sites can be minimized through targeted measures rather than through a general ban under REACH, for example, in occupational health and safety, emission control, or waste legislation. Environmental risks can also be addressed via targeted legislative measures for many products and processes. The next slide deals with our main concerns regarding the EU PFAS restriction approach in the EU. What concerns us? The achievement of the climate goals of the European Green Deal will be hampered if the use of PFAS does not remain possible for key technologies where there are no substitutes available at full scale. The derogations currently envisaged are insufficient. They do not take into account the relevance of PFAS for a wide range of uses and innovations necessary for the technology industry to fulfill, e.g., the climate targets of the Green Deal, the European Chips Act, and other strategic objectives set out by the EU. In addition, many sectors and applications have not been sufficiently addressed in the dossier. A general ban on PFAS could adversely affect our members' competitiveness and production capability and lead to very negative economic consequences. We are deeply concerned that the consequences for the economy are being underestimated, as our members will find it difficult to continue production in Europe facing the provisions of the current restriction dossier, which could force industry to relocate. We are concerned that effective market surveillance and enforcement of the EU PFAS restriction and a level playing field for all market participants will be challenging to achieve. This is also reflected in the statement of the ECHA Enforcement Forum. This could result in potential distortions of the single market, especially at external borders, but also within the EU. What we are increasingly concerned about is the variety of different PFAS measures that have recently been proposed by some EU member states. Considering the slow pace of the current approach to the restriction proposal, some member states, for example France and Denmark, are opting for their own national legislation on PFAS. The delay in opinion building in the EU and the resulting planning uncertainty is a consequence of the chosen holistic restriction approach. Unpredictability due to the non-defined timeline for PFAS restriction creates uncertainty for our industries. Predictability and planning certainty are crucial for companies using PFAS in their production processes and in their products. The unpredictable landscape resulting from the significant delay in the PFAS restriction proposal increases the risks associated with investment decisions. Thank you very much for your attention. I now will hand over to my dear colleague Arthur, who will present Orgalim's key recommendations regarding the EU PFAS restriction dossier.
Thank you, Kirsten, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to present to you what our industries recommend for the improvement of the PFAS restriction proposal. And thank you once again, Mr. Bickman, for being with us today for this policy exchange. Our first recommendation is to not implement a general ban on PFAS as long as substitutes for all uses are not recognized and not all uses of PFAS are reflected in the restriction dossier. The impact on the Green Deal and socioeconomic factors should consider all available PFAS uses and the consequences a restriction may have on them. We also recommend following a risk-based approach and substance-based approach to develop the PFAS restriction proposal. The proposed blanket ban of all PFAS, regardless of their individual toxicity and risk profile, do not fulfill the requirements of the REACH regulation. For this reason, we call for a more differentiated regulatory approach in order to be more consistent with the requirements of a restriction process under the REACH regulation. In addition, we consider that an EU harmonized approach on PFAS in products should be developed instead of national and coordinated measures. A circular single market with a harmonized approach to the various circular economy initiatives is essential to avoid a patchwork of different measures on PFAS in individual EU member states. It is also essential to carry out an impact assessment on the ability of ECHA and national enforcement authorities to inspect the conformity of the numerous complex products containing PFAS in the market. And we also consider that an information obligation for intentionally added PFAS prior to the restriction will allow a smoother implementation. Today, most PFAS do not have a harmonized classification according to CLP and are not listed in the REACH candidate list. Therefore, information is not provided along the whole supply chain of PFAS. For example, the inclusion of PFAS in the REACH candidate list would allow all relevant uses to be included in the assessment, alternatives to be developed, and any necessary derogation to be applied for in due time. A list with the names and case number of PFAS and the scope of the restriction is needed to facilitate supply chain communication as well as compliance and enforcement. Next slide, please. Another key element for our industries is to define procedure for derogations clearly. Application, review, and extension for derogations must be clear, especially in the case of the broad restriction of previously non-declarable substances to ensure feasibility. We also call for the application of the repair as produced principle, indefinite derogations for spare parts, refurbished parts, and equipment, as well as products already being placed on the market, should be granted to support further sustainability goals and in particular circular economy. We also recommend implementing a general exclusion of fluoropolymers without relevant risk. Fluoropolymers are non-toxic and non-bioaccumulate and do not pose a risk during the use phase of product. Safe uses of PFAS in equipment, components, and industrial applications generally do not cause associated emissions to the environment, and fluoropolymers are, of course, of high industrial importance. Another point regarding fluoropolymers is that under the new essential use concept, fluoropolymers should not be banned. The European Commission considers that the essential use concept should be assessed for the most harmful substances. Fluoropolymers are non-toxic and do not fulfill any criterion defined by the European Commission regarding these most harmful substances. This confirms that fluoropolymers should not be banned. And finally, the threshold level of 25 ppb for solid materials should be removed and replaced by a threshold level of 0.1% PFAS in the waste of products when intentionally added in the manufacturing process. This will avoid the in-depth analysis of solid or complex products with potentially unreliable results. Although for liquid and gases, the threshold level should be higher to allow easier analysis and avoid restriction of contaminated materials with no intentionally added PFAS. Thank you very much for your attention. I will now give the floor to Daniel for the next steps of our policy exchange.
So thank you both very much for interesting presentations. And with that, I would now like to welcome all the three remaining panelists to join with camera so that we can see the three of you simultaneously, since this next stage is a panel. So we warmly welcome Dr. Ulrich Hutschek, Denise Lee, and Holger Sack. And first out is Dr. Ulrich Hutschek, and then it's Holger Sack, and last but definitely not least, Dennis Lee. So, Dr. Ulrich Hutschek, the floor is yours.
Yes, Daniel, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. I will go on with the discussion we already had, and we'll focus on our research where we try to find substitutes. Right? We heard a lot already about the discussion if there would be substitutes or if not, and so what we try to do here is to nail it down and find substitutes. Next slide, please. So the project we did this together with the FVA, which is the Research Association for Drive Technology, which is part of the VDMA. So our focus was drive technologies, obviously. And so what we did as a group, first, we tried to pin down the most affected applications, the applications which would be most affected of a PFAS ban. The goal here was to reduce complexity in such kind of a project, and so what we discussed as a group was to focus on seals. We will hear later the problems about seals. I guess Denise will talk about this as well. Sliding elements, insulation materials, and lubricants. And then together with the industry experts, we then discussed why are PFAS applied in these applications right now? What are the functions which are provided by the PFAS? These were the six you can read right here. It's of course the sliding properties, looking into drive applications. We have a lot of mechanical load, right? So what Martijn showed, the consumer applications, I would say maybe they are not so much mechanically stressed as like in our industry applications here. So the sliding properties are a big issue. Then of course the long-term stability, thermal stability, chemical resistance, and so on. And what makes it more complex is that in the applications we looked into, in most of the cases, there are at least 2, 3, or 4 of these functions which have to be available at the same time, right? So it's not that we have one function to replace, but a configuration of functions. So what we did with these functions, with these 6, we looked into research. In this case, it was a Web of Science. And we searched for papers which dealt about these functions, right? So we did not look for materials directly, but we searched for research about these functions, about these 6 functions. And we searched for research which said, okay, we could improve sliding properties, for example, right? And so with these search queries, we found over 26,000 articles, recent articles dealing with these functions. And then we took our own AI system, which then searched for materials within these articles. I know maybe it's in these 5 minutes, maybe it's a little complex. I hope I can make myself clear. In these papers with our AI, we searched for materials. We found 428 materials in 30 material categories, which doesn't sound too bad right now. So next slide, please. So what we did with these materials, we went back to our original applications and tried to reduce all these materials we found only to a number which could be applied in an application, right? Because the material within these 428, there are not only some, precisely 30 materials which could be applied. And in this insulation material, as an insulation, these were completely different materials. As a lubricant, of course, fluid, completely different materials. So the number already got like reduced from 428 to like 30, 35, 26, and 20. And then, with this list of materials, we went back to the experts and tried to detect or try to evaluate the substitution potential. We already heard Martin Beckmann mentioned the regrettable substitution. Of course, we wanted to avoid that, so we checked this. We checked the performance of these materials and could like group all these findings into 3 cases. The first case would be that the substitution of PFAS indeed is possible, but this is only true for the applications where PFAS would have not been necessary in the first place, right? Where PFAS was applied because it was there and it is convenient, but you could have used something else in the first place. To find a substitution here is not so important, right? So the second case is that we found that there is a lot going on in the research and there maybe will be alternatives in the future. The problem right now is that in most cases, the potential right now is very unclear. Okay, 1 minute left. The third case is that the carbon fluor bond is so superior that we will never find a substitution. And the main problem is that right now, for most cases, we cannot tell if it's case 2 or case 3. So we have to track the research. We have to see where the performance is going with the materials. But maybe we won't find an alternative for some applications at all. This was the fastest run through I could make possible with this research. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And with that, then I pass the floor to Holger Sack. The floor is yours. So the screen is yours, rather.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you for your invitation. I'm happy and proud to speak on behalf of ZVI and DERF, especially for PFAS Task Force, Process Automation, Monitoring and Control Sector. We have given you here a small overview about the equipment we are speaking, but next slide, I like to give you a short overview about the product range itself and the requirements. We speak in general about 3 major group of equipment. First is measurement and control devices like sensors, actors, or encoders. Then we speak about monitoring and control systems like DCS, SCS, or AMS systems. And last but not least, we speak about process infrastructure like interfaces, pipings, filters, connectors, and so on. You find this type of equipment on a very range of industries all over Europe, starting from food, pharmaceutical, energy, chemical, petrochemical, building materials, environment recycling, and so on. everywhere where there is an industrial production of substances and materials. And due to the nature of these industries, we have a huge range of requirements to the equipment, starting from a wide range of chemical resistance to virtually all or nearly all chemicals. We have extreme temperature and pressure ranges, going over to having or requiring good electrical or dielectrical properties. And as the conclusion over the last decades, this type of industry sector used fluoropolymers as the most suitable substances or materials to fulfill all these requirements from all over these industries. Next slide, please. So, however, investigation have been done in the past, some time ago already started, and we have looked as an industry into several directions. We looked for non-PFAS polymers, we looked for non-PFAS elastomers, we looked for other type of materials like metals, and few substances were found to substitute individual requirements, some of the requirements of this industry, of our industry, but no one could substitute all of those requirements like fluoropolymer do. So, and that's the conclusion shown on the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, that we have done a lot of investigation, literature research. We have spoken to experts on the material industry side. We have started already and finished research projects with internal and external laboratories, institutes, and universities. And every time the result was that there is no alternative material found to fluoropolymers like we have today so far. As I said, some of the requirements can substitute it, but not all at once. And this is the result or the conclusion of the researches and investigations all members of our group have done so far. That was all what I wanted to show you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. And then we go on to the last panelist, and then we also have some questions to the three of you. So I pass the screen to Denise Lee. Warmly welcome.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank you all for the opportunity to be able to speak to you today for a few moments about graphite as a possible PFAS alternative in the mechanical sealing industry. Next slide, please. First, I thought it's important that you understand the importance of a mechanical seal. When you speak about mechanical seals, you normally hear two things: static seals and dynamic seals. If you refer to the diagram that's shown on the screen, you'll see that a static seal is nothing more than a sealing material that's placed between two mating surfaces that don't move. They're stationary. Conversely, a dynamic seal means you're putting the sealing material between two mating surfaces that do move. That movement could be rotation, it could be reciprocation, or it could be oscillation. But most importantly is the functionality of a mechanical seal. It's designed to contain media, whether that's a solid or a liquid or a gas. In other words, it's preventing spills, leaks, and emissions. And these sealing materials that are used, there are lots of criteria that we use to determine if they can be used in certain applications. First of all, we think about the environmental conditions. What's the media that the seal is going to be exposed to? Is it an acid? Is it a base? Is it a solvent? What are the temperatures? How about the pressures that are needed? The speeds, abrasion. Then there's the inability to damage other equipment, the hardware itself. We don't want to put in a sealing material that could damage, all right, the hardware internal to the seal. And it's got to be compatible with the counter surface to maximize sealing efficiency. That, in a nutshell, is what a mechanical seal is all about. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about graphite. There are pros to graphite. Number one, it's naturally occurring material, all right? So we don't have to worry about anything toxic. It's not going to produce any byproducts that we have to worry about. And also, it's naturally lubricious, meaning it has lubricating properties. It's unique in that it has properties of both a metal and a non-metal, which from an engineering standpoint, that can be very important. It can be used in both static and dynamic sealing applications, which we talked about on the previous slide. It's been widely used in the past in the nuclear, chemical, petrochemical, automotive, and pulp and paper industries. And flexible graphite is so malleable, it can conform to irregularities. So you really don't have to worry if there's indentations, pitting, it can take up those particular spaces. That's the pros. But I'm also going to tell you that graphite has a niche purpose. It is not the be-all, end-all, and is not going to be able to handle the majority of the issues in the mechanical sealing industry. From what we've seen internally in our own workplaces and with our own products, we might be able to use it maybe in 10% of our applications. So what are the cons? Flexible graphite is susceptible to chemical attack in the presence of strong oxidizers, and that even includes air or extremely high temperatures, which are environments that we have to work in. Graphite's service life is inferior to that of fluoropolymers. That means our customers aren't going to be very happy. It means we're going to have to replace things more often, more downtime, more expenses to our customers. Graphite needs to be preset, meaning it needs to be compressed to ensure a seal, which means we have to maintain a constant load on it at all times for it to function properly. It doesn't maintain its shape very well under high pressure. This is where we even internally saw failures and could not find a good workaround. Graphite, as I've said, is an organic material, but that also means with the oxidation, it will lose its integrity and performance will diminish over time. And as I said, that means our customers are going to require more downtime, more maintenance. It really should not be considered for use in food contact applications because, again, with the oxidation that we talked about, there can be particle transfer. It's relatively weak at low temperatures, thereby it limits its use in many of the key industrial sectors that we have to play in. It has very poor performance in high temperature water applications. If you look at the structure that I've shown on this slide at the right, what happens is that the water penetrates the layers. And when the part is subjected to high temperatures, basically what happens, it expands and those layers delaminate, meaning we have a failure. And there are basically two types of graphite that you can look at out there. Like what I'm showing you in that diagram, there are the linear flat layers. They're less expensive to manufacture. That's great for a manufacturer, but they tend to leak, as I described it a moment ago. The wrinkled layers, I call them wrinkled, and they're called that in all of the literature as well. They're basically formed from expanded graphite. They're expensive to manufacture, but they do have better performance. And those are the materials that we have tried to use, and of which I've said we've seen maybe a 10% ability to be able to apply it in our industry. So again, we just ask you to take that into consideration when thinking about PFAS alternatives. There is not one magic bullet that can be used in the mechanical sealing industry to be able to resolve the PFAS issue and the use of PFAS containing materials. With that said, thank you very much, and I turn the floor back over to the moderator.
Thank you so much. Very interesting, and we have some questions here, and I would like to start with a question to Ulrich. So the first question is on how did you approach this problem using artificial intelligence?
Yes, sure. So the most important fact here is that we did not use AI in a way that could hallucinate, right? If you now hear about AI solutions, you hear about GPT a lot, and everybody right now. In the meantime, everybody knows that it's not very reliable. But as I mentioned, what we did, we had as an input for our AI solution, we had empirical data. We put 26,000 papers in, so there was no way no wiggle room for hallucination whatsoever. So the AI solution we use, it's an own development, and we originally developed it for our foresighting projects, right? So we help companies find new technologies by doing more or less the same. We search for functions in papers, and then we have, it's called named entity recognition, meaning we can look for specific aspects in these papers. So normally we look for technologies to help, like in pre-development, or we look for technology applications if we help in business development. And we use these capabilities and create a new model which could detect materials. And so we used our system, gave it a new twist, and by this we could find the materials in the research, which then we could work with.
Thank you very much. And I then take the opportunity to ask you a second question, and that is, what can be done next according to your study?
Yeah, so I guess there will come up more research over time into alternatives. I mean, the topic is obviously very hot right now. So the first thing which has to be done is like to find the application fields where substitution will be possible. As I mentioned, right now it's not so clear. I just saw the issues with the ceilings, and so there has to be done research and looked into where substitutions could be possible, and then of course like the regulation should act accordingly, of course. And what also can be done, and this is what we will also be part of together with the Fraunhofer Institute, we will set up a database where companies can look up alternatives for the application, where companies can check if they have a problem. Because in our project we saw like talking to drive technology companies, a lot of them did not know early enough that they would have a problem, because it's like it's upstream the problem, right? It's with the suppliers of the components, and so there has to be clarity, there has to be communication, and we will try to help with this with the Fraunhofer Institute.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Then I pass on to asking two questions here to Holger, and the first one is then, what suggestion do you have for reducing the risk posed by PFAS in the area that you have presented?
Yeah, first of all, we want to use PFAS-containing materials only there where it's really needed, but there we speak about 80 to 90% of all application I have shown you. Second, of course, we need to have further developments to the recycling processes already existing, and maybe future recycling processes of fluoropolymers. And of course, further investigations, researches into real substitution materials, and all may be also supported by the European Union. This is what we suggest to reduce very fast the risk of PFAS in our industry, in our sector.
Thank you very much. Then I have a second question for you, Holger, and that is, what is the proposal for the process automation, monitoring, and control sector?
There we like first to have a definition of the special sector process automation, monitoring, and control due to the huge range of products we have, huge industry we are in, and due to the essential requirements we have to the products and to the fluoropolymers, of course. We need to have an exemption for spare part. You have seen, I haven't spoken about, but you have seen life cycle time of our equipment is some decades, starting from the development phase, going over certification phase, operation phase, into the final spare part phase, let's say. Therefore, we need that exemption. And also, generally speaking, we like to have an exemption for fluoropolymers of this restriction, or if not possible, a maximum derogation time plus transition time due to the long life cycles we have for development and operation of this equipment.
Thank you so much for that. And I would like to ask two questions to Denise Lee. And the first one is if you think graphite should be used as an alternative to PFAS in the hydrogen sector.
The answer is basically that due to the harsh environment in combination with the sensitivity of the fuel cells used in the hydrogen sector, you have to be very concerned about contamination. In other words, very stable sealing materials are going to be needed. Fluorine-free elastomers such as graphite are certainly under evaluation, but as I spoke about previously, oxidative deterioration of the material means that we need to be concerned about contamination of the fuel cell because that could limit its lifetime. So that's one deterrent. Fluorine-free elastomers also suffer from dimensional stability and in many cases will require mechanical reinforcement. When you add something like a metal sheet to strengthen these materials, what happens is your chemical resistance is sacrificed and obviously cost is significantly increased. Therefore, we'd like to just be able to say that further R&D is needed. There's no guarantee of success at this stage that graphite could be used. It's impossible to predict when or if these potential alternatives will be ready for deployment. Our recommendation would be that the regulators take a very cautious approach in restricting PFAS uses for this key industrial sector of the EU economy.
Thank you so much for that. Then I take the opportunity to ask you a second question. So on top of the challenge of finding suitable PFAS alternatives, are there other operational complications specific to the sealings industry that regulators should take into account while considering restrictions, temporary derogations?
There are basically four things that we'd like to see in addition taken into consideration. One would be repairs under warranty. We need to be able to replace existing PFAS containing components within our products until the end of life of the seal. So otherwise, it's liable to cause prolonged downtime for our customers while a new seal is having to be designed and manufactured. And that obviously comes at an expense to both the customer and the manufacturer. Also, there's concerns regarding inventory. The time that'll be allotted for stock depletion needs to be taken into consideration, especially again with respect to the end of life. When we're talking about mechanical seals, a single spring type seal might have an expected lifespan range of 1 to 2 years, a cartridge seal 2 to 4 years, and a metal bellows seal of, let's say, 3 to 5 years or longer. So that needs to be taken into consideration. Also, manufactured products that span multiple sectors, all right, our concerns are the sealing support systems that get sold hand in hand with a mechanical seal. To maintain and support a seal, That sealing system helps to contribute to leak preventions, extending the lifetime of a mechanical seal, cooling, pressure control, and fluid containment. These systems that I'm talking about require electronic components, like one of the other speakers has already mentioned. That also includes semiconductors. So regardless of the market sector that the seal and the sealing support system will be used in, there really needs to be one derogation as opposed to discrete market sector waivers, in our opinion, for all the products manufactured by the mechanical sealing industry. At this stage, basically, the overlap or the independency between the various sectors does not seem to be taken into account in the current EU PFAS restriction proposal, and that is concerning to us as being part of the sealing industry. And last but not least, we also do take into consideration our customers. There is something called a PPAP, which is a production part approval process. And that, depending on whether it's for general industry or for the aerospace, could take anywhere from 1 year to 10 years to complete. Our customers, when we make a change, just don't say, yes, go ahead and do it. We have to go through a lot of different steps and testing to be able to validate that change. And as I said, depending upon the industry that this will affect, that could be as simple as a 1 year or as long as a 10-year time frame to be able to have happen. So we hope that the EU Commission will take this into consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Denise, and thank you to the whole panel. I will now ask you to stay and also ask everybody, all the other speakers also to join to put on their cameras simultaneously. And we now have a Q&A session, which means that we will cover questions that was sent in by the audience prior to today's policy exchange. So thank you so much. And with that, I start off with a first question to Martin Beckman from the European Commission, and that is then particularly looking at the restriction planning uncertainty and the merging of several national legislations on PFAS. Is the Commission considering refraining from adopting a general restriction on PFAS under the same dossier, and as an alternative policy option, asking ECHA to prepare multiple substance-specific or emission-specific PFAS restrictions dossier in order to give a clearer time frame to stakeholders and to foster swifter restriction processes? So, simple question. I'll pass the floor to you, Martin.
Well, then you deserve a simple answer, and the answer is no. But let me explain it. I also don't think it will be a swifter restriction proposal, because we have to face that the restriction dossier prepared by these 5 countries has been submitted, so it has to be processed. We cannot stop that. So the second phase, as explained in my presentation, we have to deal with that. We have to have this assessment, and we have to have the opinions. Once it is at our desk, then of course we can decide to go ahead with partial restrictions or to start new procedures. They can do a lot of things, but it will not prevent, we cannot prevent this dossier to be assessed, so we have to take care. And I also trust ECHA and the committees that they are doing a good job, so I don't think we should stop this. Let's wait for their outcome, push them to be as quickly as possible, but also thoroughly, taking into account all comments, and then we will receive a well underpinned, justified opinion, I would say.
Thank you. And then I take the opportunity to ask a question to the whole panel. If there is any advice from the panel towards downstream users on how to address missing alternatives for a specific use. Anyone wants to go first? I see that both Denise and Kirsten have unmuted themselves, so I will then, maybe because Denise spoke quite recently, I will pass the floor to Kirsten. for now.
Thank you. I unmuted myself because of a mistake, but of course I will try to
Okay.
answer the question. How to address missing alternatives? I think the first chance would have been to participate in the recent consultation during the last year from March until September, but of course, due to the lack of transparency in the supply chains, many companies struggle with information deficits on PFAS in their processes. And if you now recognize that you have a use of PFAS in your product or in your process and are not able to find an alternative, I believe it is the best way forward to go into contact with the authorities in the member states who submitted the dossier and also pass on this information to ECHA and to, of course, also the European Commission. So I do not have no better advice right now. And hope
Thank
this
you.
answers the question.
Thank you, Kirsten. And I now see that Denise also, you have unmuted yourself. Does that mean also you want to give an answer here? I
Yes,
would very
please,
much
if
welcome
that's
that. Okay. Yes. Go ahead.
one of the things that I'd like to suggest is your suppliers obviously have a vested interest in this. So one of the things we certainly are looking into is seeing about collaboration and partnerships with our various elastomer suppliers. They're integral to being able to support us. They don't want to lose business any more than we want to lose business. So that's one way. The other way is look at some of the local universities in your respective countries and areas. They're more than willing to work with you as well. And I am certainly not putting down consultants when I say this either. You can certainly look into consultants as well. But I'm looking for ways that opportunities that might be easiest and cheapest. So your suppliers and possibly collaborating with the local universities would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Seems like Martin, you also want to have a go at answering and giving advice on for downstream users on how to address the challenges.
Yes, since Kirsten kindly suggested that you can send the information to the Commission, well, you of course can contact us, but you will receive more or less the same answer as I give during the presentation because I cannot act too much. So I would definitely file all the information you have. If you have not submitted in the previous consultation or similar companies, be aware there will be a second consultation. Then it's really the time to submit any missed uses.
Thank you so much, Martin, for that clarification. Does anybody else want to answer the question about how downstream users can address missing alternatives for a specific use? Otherwise, we have another question from to the Commission here, and this one is about evidence that emissions from polymeric PFAS production during manufacturing and end life can be managed sufficiently. So how will the Commission take this evidence base into consideration prior to proposing any restrictions for PFAS? For example, the proposal to include PFAS emissions in the BREF for chemical industries in accordance with the Industrial Emissions Directive. So how will the Commission take this evidence base into consideration prior to proposing restrictions on PFAS? The screen is yours, Martin. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think this initiative is very interesting. We also have had meetings with the fluoropolymer manufacturers so they can explain what they have in mind. And we also suggested to be more concrete because it was still quite general what their suggestion was. They also submitted their information to the ECHA's consultation, so the both committees can take it into account because they have to judge if there is a risk and if there is an alternative way to address those risks. So I would see this as a part of the entire restriction procedure.
Thank you so much, Martin. And to be frank here, when we received questions from the audience, quite a lot of the questions were directed to you, Martin. So there will be another question to you, and that is from a decision making perspective. If you and the Commission have drawn any lessons regarding the PFAS restriction proposal over the last years that could potentially be improve the process under the next college with regards to the REACH revision?
Well, I think from the PFAS restriction, we can learn two things. One is on the substitution planning. I already mentioned during my presentation a bit on substitution planning that the current system for restriction and authorization is too strict. It's not flexible, and where we should have a more flexible approach. We know this from other regulations as well, that you sometimes have more interaction with stakeholders during the process. So therefore, we started this substitution planning project that was not only based on the PFAS restriction, it was also based on the experience with all the chromium-6 authorization, which is giving us an enormous amount of workload and which is also not very efficient. The other lesson I think we still need to learn, but certainly it will be reflected the coming years, is the group approach. We very much welcome a group approach because we think it's not very useful to go substance by substance, but maybe a group can also be too big. I don't know. I think we have not too much experience with group approaches yet, so I think we definitely have to look how can we make this group approach workable, and will this also fit into the system? Because we have all kinds of deadlines formulated in REACH, which is hardly manageable for only one substance and one application. And if we are now going to groups of substances with many applications, then certainly those timelines will not be able to be met. So I think we will have to learn from this experience.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for that. And with that, I will take the opportunity to, although this is quite a to some extent a technical discussion here, I will take the opportunity to ask a question that's a bit more political, mainly to the European Commission, and that is that there is evidence that a ban on fluoropolymers, to which there is no full-scale technically economically viable and safe alternative for the time being, may result in severe economic challenges, potentially decreased competitiveness. How will the Commission take this evidence into consideration while proposing restrictions on PFAS?
Well, I think that I addressed this question already in my presentation. We will come up with a balanced approach, taking into account both the risk on the one side and the availability of alternatives and the economic impact on the other side.
Thank you so much for that. And with that, I would like to thank all the panelists for very interesting contributions today, and it's very appreciated, and very happy to see so many people registering. I hope you also feel that was beneficial for you to participate in this discussion and be able to find a path forward on a sort of comprehensive approach to PFAS. And with that, I also want to say that the recording of the event will be available soon. You will receive an email with a link to the recording. A news article about the event will also be published on the Orgalim website. If you want to receive news from our industries and the latest EU policies, please register for our newsletter. We have also planned for future policy exchanges. In the autumn, we will have planning to do something on industrial data spaces, and corporate sustainability is also another plan, but all our members, feel free to send suggestions on what you want to focus on the policy exchange. We look forward to working with all the panelists that participated today going forward. So we're not at the end of this process yet. We'll continue working on PFAS, and I know we will also reach out to Martin and others at the Commission going forward. Very much appreciate your participation. And with that, I wish you all a really nice afternoon and rest of your Wednesday. Thank you all so much. I think you deserve a warm online applause for your contributions at the panel today. Very well done. Thank you so much. And see you at the next policy exchange. Thank you. Bye bye. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye bye.